The dining room on Wemco Road, Lagos, was filled with laughter that night. Not the warm kind. The sharp kind, the kind that cuts deep even when nobody is touching you. Gerald stood at the head of the table, wine glass raised high, looking like a man who had just conquered the world. His mother Beverly sat beside him in her finest lace blouse, beaming with pride. His sister Tanya and his brother Kevin sat across from each other, both grinning like they had won a bet. They had all gathered for this moment. All dressed up. All celebrating. At the far end of the table sat Sandra. Quiet as always. Sandra had spent the entire afternoon in that kitchen. She made pepper soup from scratch. She fried plantain until the kitchen smelled like Sunday. She cooked jollof rice so good it could make a grown man cry. The table was full and beautiful. But not one person said thank you. They never did. Gerald cleared his throat and the room went silent. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a stack of papers. He slid them slowly across the table with a wide, cruel smile. "This house," he announced, his voice thick with satisfaction. "I am transferring it today to someone who actually appreciates me. For 1 naira. Wendy sat right beside him, smiling like she had already won. She was younger than Sandra, always dressed in designer everything, always polished and loud. She worked with Gerald at his real estate firm in Victoria Island. And somewhere between showing properties and closing deals, she had decided to close in on Sandra's husband too. Beverly jumped up and pulled Wendy into a long embrace. "Finally. My son is free." Tanya raised her glass. Kevin laughed loud enough for the neighbors to hear. They toasted. They cheered. They acted like justice had finally been served. Sandra did not move. Her hands sat folded quietly in her lap. Her eyes were dry. Her face was still. She did not scream. She did not beg. She just watched them the way you watch a film about someone else's life. "Why is she not saying anything?" Wendy whispered to Gerald. Gerald shrugged, that cold smile never leaving his face. "Because she has nothing. No family. No money. No power. She has been living off me for 6 years and she knows it." Sandra stood up slowly, smoothed her dress and said softly, "Excuse me." She walked to the guest bedroom and closed the door without a single sound. Behind her, the celebration continued like she had never existed. But inside that quiet room, Sandra opened her laptop. The screen glowed on her calm face as she looked at the numbers. $900 million in property. 73 buildings. 18 residential complexes. 4 shopping centers. She picked up her phone and made 3 calls. In exactly 14 days, Gerald's entire world would fall apart. But how did a quiet, humble woman end up owning an empire that big? And why did nobody around her ever suspect a thing? Sandra grew up in a small house on the outskirts of Enugu. The paint on the walls was peeling in places, but the house was always clean and always full of love. She had lost both her parents in a car accident when she was just 5 years old. From that day forward, her grandmother Rose raised her. Rose was not a rich woman. She worked as a housekeeper for wealthy families in the GRA district of Enugu, scrubbing floors and washing dishes 6 days a week without a single complaint. Her hands were rough and weathered from years of hard work. But her eyes were always sharp, always kind, always watching. Rose saw everything. One evening, when Sandra was 12 years old, Rose sat her down at the kitchen table and held her small hands in her own. "Baby girl," Rose said quietly, "people will judge you by what they see. They will think because you are quiet, you are weak. They will think because you are humble, you have nothing." She paused, her eyes steady and serious. "But never let them see all your cards. A quiet woman is underestimated. And an underestimated woman is the most dangerous kind." Rose reached into her pocket and pulled out a small silver locket. Inside were 2 tiny photographs, one of Rose when she was young and one of Sandra as a baby. "Wear this always," Rose said, fastening it gently around Sandra's neck. "Remember where you come from. Remember who loves you. And remember that real power does not need to announce itself." Sandra never took that locket off. Not once. Through secondary school, Sandra worked part-time jobs and studied late into the night. Through university in Abuja, she earned a scholarship and studied finance and real estate investment. She was always quiet, always focused, always watching and learning. People underestimated her everywhere she went. That was exactly how she wanted it. When Rose passed away the year Sandra graduated, she left behind 19 properties scattered across the South, buildings she had bought quietly over 40 years of saving every kobo she earned. Sandra stood in the lawyer's office in Enugu, holding the documents with trembling hands. 19 buildings. From a woman who cleaned other people's houses her whole life. Sandra took those 19 buildings and studied them like they were sacred. She learned everything: property management, real estate investment, building wealth in complete silence. Within 5 years, she had turned 19 buildings into 37. Within 8 years, she had 52. She operated through companies registered under different names, keeping her own name completely out of public records. She did not need anyone to know. She just needed to build. Then she met Gerald. He was 30 years old, charming and smooth, working as a real estate agent in Lagos. He brought her flowers on their second date. He told her she was different from other women. "You are real," he said, his voice soft and convincing. "You are humble. You do not need all the flashy things. That is what I love about you." Sandra fell hard. He made her feel seen. Made her feel chosen. When he proposed after 8 months, she said yes without hesitation. They married in a small quiet ceremony in Port Harcourt. Sandra wore Rose's locket around her neck that day, feeling like her grandmother was standing right there beside her, smiling. But Sandra never told Gerald about the properties. She wanted him to love her for her, not for what she owned. She wanted to know that the man who promised forever truly meant it. She kept building her empire in silence while cooking his dinners, supporting his career, and being the humble wife he thought he had married. She thought love was enough. She was wrong. The days after Gerald signed the house over to Wendy were brutal. Beverly showed up on the second day with boxes and black trash bags, her face twisted in disgust. She walked through the front door like she already owned the place. "Start packing your things," she told Sandra coldly. "Wendy is moving in next week. You have been a burden long enough." Sandra was in the kitchen making tea. She turned slowly, looked at Beverly with calm, steady eyes. "I will be out soon," she said quietly. "You better be," Beverly snapped. "My son wasted 6 years on you. 6 years he could have spent with a real woman. You should be ashamed of yourself." Sandra did not respond. She picked up her tea and walked back to the guest bedroom, closing the door softly behind her. On the third day, Tanya posted on social media. "Some women hold on to men who do not want them. Embarrassing. Pathetic. Move on, sister." She tagged Gerald and Wendy in the post. The likes came rolling in immediately. People Sandra had considered friends commented laughing emojis. It was public humiliation designed to break her completely. Sandra saw the post. She did not comment. She did not react. She simply got dressed the next morning in her business clothes, picked up her leather briefcase, and walked out the front door like any other professional woman heading to work. Nobody in Gerald's family ever asked where she worked. They assumed it was some low-level office job. Something beneath them. Something small. They never once imagined the truth. Jerome showed up on the 5th day with a moving truck. Kevin leaned against the door frame with his arms crossed, looking Sandra up and down. "Gerald is being generous letting you take your things," he said. "Don't push your luck." "I won't," Sandra said softly. Kevin laughed and shook his head. "You are really something, you know that? Just taking all of this like it is nothing. Where is your pride, woman?" Sandra's hand moved slowly to the locket at her throat. She looked at Kevin with quiet, steady eyes. "Pride is not loud, Kevin," she said. "You will learn that eventually." He walked away shaking his head, calling her foolish under his breath. By the 7th day, Wendy was walking through the house with an interior designer, pointing at walls and discussing furniture like Sandra was already gone. Sandra was still living there, still sleeping in the guest room, still making her simple meals in the kitchen, still moving through the house like it belonged to her. Because it did. Wendy spoke about Sandra like she was a ghost that needed to be removed. "I want her energy completely erased from these walls," she told the designer. "Everything she touched, I want it gone." Sandra walked past them carrying a cup of coffee, her face completely calm. Wendy watched her go, confused and unsettled. "Why is she not angry?" she whispered. "If someone took my man in my house, I would tear this place apart." On the 10th day, Gerald cornered Sandra in the kitchen. She was washing dishes, her movements slow and careful. "Why are you still here?" he demanded. "Have you no self-respect?" Sandra turned off the tap and dried her hands. "I'm leaving soon, Gerald. I just need a few more days." "For what?" Gerald laughed, cruel and sharp. "You have nowhere to go. Your grandmother is dead. You are completely alone. You have nothing." Sandra's fingers moved to her locket. "You know your problem?" Gerald stepped closer, dropping his voice to a vicious whisper. "You are too quiet. A real woman would have fought for her marriage. Would have made herself valuable. But you just exist. You're like a ghost. That is why I needed Wendy. She is alive. She is passionate. She makes me feel like a man. You are just nothing. Sandra's eyes filled with tears for the first time since the nightmare began. But she did not let them fall. I hope she makes you happy, Gerald, she whispered. I truly do. That night, alone in the guest bedroom, Sandra opened her laptop and made 3 phone calls, to her lawyer, her business manager, and her accountant. It is time, she told each one of them. And somewhere in the darkness, she touched Rose's locket and whispered, I tried to love him, Grandma. But now it is time they see who I really am. What none of them knew was that some of the very properties Gerald had sold as an agent over the years belonged to Sandra. She had hired him through her shell companies, wanting to support his career, lifting him up quietly while he tore her down. But not anymore. The Southeast Real Estate Investment Conference opened its doors at the Eco Convention Center in Lagos on a bright Tuesday morning. Over 3,000 real estate professionals packed the building. Investors, developers, agents, brokers, all the biggest players in the industry. The energy inside was electric. People shaking hands, exchanging cards, making deals worth millions before lunch. Gerald arrived with Wendy on his arm. Both of them were dressed like they were attending a movie premiere. Gerald wore a custom suit with shoes polished to a mirror shine. Wendy wore a red dress that cost more than most people's monthly salary. They walked through the convention center like royalty, Gerald introducing Wendy to his colleagues, his chest puffed out with pride. His whole family was there too. Beverly wore her best lace and her church hat, looking proud as a peacock. Tanya and Kevin followed close behind, all of them acting like they had finally arrived at the table that mattered. This is where the real players come, Gerald told Wendy, scanning the room with satisfied eyes. Millionaires. Moguls. This is my world. I have been working toward this my whole career. They found their seats right in the center of the main conference hall, where everyone could see them. Gerald wanted to be visible. He wanted people to see him with his new woman, his new life, his new status. He felt completely untouchable. The lights dimmed. The conference host, a distinguished man in a gray suit, walked onto the stage and tapped the microphone. The crowd settled. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice smooth and commanding, we have a very special keynote speaker today. Gerald leaned forward, curious. This person has been operating quietly in our industry for over a decade. A mystery investor who has been acquiring premium properties across Lagos, Abuja, and Port Harcourt, with a portfolio valued at over $900 million. Gerald's eyebrows shot up. This was exactly the kind of player he had always wanted to meet. The kind of person who could take his career to a completely different level. This individual has chosen today, the host continued, to step out of the shadows and reveal themselves to our community for the very first time. The room held its breath. Please welcome the owner of Sterling Holdings Group, Sandra Sterling. The massive screen behind the stage lit up with a professional photograph. A woman in a sharp navy power suit, head held high, eyes calm and completely confident. 3,000 people gasped at once. But nobody, absolutely nobody, gasped louder than Gerald. His wine glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. The sound was swallowed by the noise of the crowd reacting all around him. His face went completely white. His mouth fell open. His body forgot how to breathe. Because the woman on that 30-foot screen was his wife. Wendy grabbed his arm, her confident smile melting into pure shock. That is Sandra? She whispered, her voice shaking. That is your wife? Beverly dug her nails into Gerald's other arm. Baby, that cannot be the same Sandra. That cannot be. But then Sandra walked onto the stage. And there was absolutely no denying it. She wore a tailored navy power suit that fitted her like it was made for her alone. Her hair was styled elegantly. She walked with her head high and her back straight, moving across that stage like she had been born on it. And around her neck, just visible above her collar, was Rose's small silver locket, the only piece of her old life she carried with her into this new one. Sandra walked to the center of the stage and looked out at the audience. Her eyes scanned the crowd slowly and deliberately until they found Gerald sitting in the middle of the room. She did not smile. She did not frown. She simply looked at him with the calm certainty of a woman who had been waiting a very long time for this exact moment. Good afternoon, Sandra said, her voice clear and strong, filling every corner of that massive hall. Many of you do not know me. I have preferred it that way. She clicked a small remote in her hand. The screen behind her changed to a map of Nigeria, covered in red pins. Dozens of them. Hundreds of them. Properties spread across 3 states. I own 73 commercial buildings, she continued, her voice as steady as a heartbeat. 18 residential complexes. 4 shopping centers. And one very special property I would like to discuss today. She clicked the remote again. The screen showed a house. A beautiful house on Wemco Road, Lagos. The conference hall went completely silent. This property, Sandra said, her voice carrying through the absolute stillness, was illegally sold 2 weeks ago by Gerald Sterling to Wendy Brooks for £1. 3,000 pairs of eyes turned to look at Gerald. He wanted to disappear. He wanted the floor to open and swallow him whole. What Mr. Sterling did not know, Sandra continued, her tone almost gentle now, is that I purchased this property 8 years ago under my maiden name, before we were ever married. The deed has always been in my name. It was never his to sell. The transaction he signed was completely worthless. What? Meaningless. Wendy shot to her feet, her face burning red with rage and humiliation. You told me you owned that house, she hissed at Gerald. You made me look like a fool. She grabbed her purse, pushed past everyone in the row and practically ran for the exit, her red dress making her look like a moving target as she fled. Sandra watched her go. Then she turned back to the audience like nothing had happened. But that is not all, Sandra said calmly. She clicked to the next slide. Documents filled the screen. Acquisition papers. Transfer of ownership. The real estate firm where Mr. Sterling works, Sterling and Associates, I purchased that company 3 days ago through one of my holding corporations. She paused for just 1 second. Mr. Sterling is, as of this morning, unemployed. Gerald made a sound like he had been punched directly in the stomach. Then Sandra's eyes moved to Kevin in the crowd. Kevin, she said clearly, the building where your restaurant operates on Adeola Odiku Street. That is one of my buildings. Your lease expires in 30 days. I will not be renewing it. Kevin sat down hard like his legs had given out completely. Sandra's gaze shifted to Tanya, who was trying to make herself invisible in her seat. And Tanya, your boutique on Amadabella Way, that is my property as well. I have already found a new tenant. One who pays rent on time. Tanya covered her mouth with both hands, her face turning green. Then Sandra looked directly at Gerald one final time. The entire convention center held its breath. You told me I was nothing, Gerald, she said, her voice soft but reaching every corner of that room. You said I had no power. No family. Nowhere to go. You said I had been living off you. She paused. You were wrong on every single count. Sandra clicked to her final slide. A photograph appeared on the massive screen behind her. An older woman with weathered hands, kind eyes, and a proud smile standing in front of a small house in Enugu. It was Rose. Sandra's grandmother. The woman who had started it all. The entire convention center was silent. My grandmother Rose worked as a housekeeper for 40 years, Sandra said, her voice soft but steady. She cleaned other people's houses. She washed other people's dishes. She never complained once. And with every kobo she saved, she quietly bought property. Sandra paused, her fingers touching the locket at her throat. When she died, she left me 19 buildings. I turned those 19 buildings into 73. I built an empire while being your wife, Gerald. While cooking your meals. While listening to your mother call me dead weight. While watching your sister mock me on social media. While hearing you tell me I was nothing. Gerald was crying now. A grown man, sitting in the middle of 3,000 people, with tears running down his face. His whole body had collapsed inward like a building whose foundation had been removed. Beverly sat beside him, no longer proud, no longer smiling. Her church hat sat crooked on her head. Her hands were shaking in her lap. Tanya had stopped trying to hide. She just sat there staring at the floor, her boutique, her income, her reputation, all of it gone in a single afternoon. Kevin had not moved since Sandra mentioned his restaurant. He sat perfectly still, like a man trying to process a loss too big to understand. The family that had laughed and toasted and celebrated 2 weeks ago now sat completely destroyed in the middle of a crowd of 3,000 witnesses. I never needed you, Gerald, Sandra said, and her voice was gentle now. Almost kind. I chose you. I loved you. I wanted to build a life with you where love mattered more than money. She let those words settle over the room like a blanket. But you taught me something valuable. You taught me that love given to the wrong person is just wasted energy. She closed her presentation. The screen behind her went dark. For one long moment, the entire hall was completely silent. Then it began. One person stood up and started clapping. Then another. Then 10. Then 100. Then the whole room was on its feet. 3,000 people giving Sandra a standing ovation, cheering and whistling, some of them openly wiping tears from their eyes. Sandra walked off that stage with her head high, Rose's locket catching the light with every step. She did not look back at Gerald. She did not need to. She had said everything that needed to be said. The weeks that followed were devastating for Gerald. He tried calling Sandra. Every number he had for her was disconnected or blocked. He went to the house on Wemco Road, but the locks had been changed and there was security at the gate who would not let him through. He sent emails. He sent letters. Every single one went unanswered. Wendy had blocked him on everything. Her social media showed her at fancy restaurants in Victoria Island with other men, laughing and living her best life like Gerald had never existed. When he tried to approach her at an industry event, she looked at him with such cold disgust that he physically stepped back. "You embarrassed me," she said. "You made me look like a gold digger who tried to steal a house that was never even yours. Do not ever speak to me again." The bad news came in waves. Tanya's boutique suffered the same fate. The viral video of Sandra's speech had made Tanya famous for all the wrong reasons. People called her the sister who mocked a billionaire. Her business collapsed within 2 months. She filed for bankruptcy and moved back home with Beverly too. Beverly had to sell her apartment. She had been so proud of that place. But without Kevin's support, she could not keep up with the payments. Ironically, Sandra had quietly purchased the apartment through a proxy company and offered to let Beverly stay at a reduced rent. But Beverly was too proud, too ashamed. She sold it for less than it was worth and moved into a small flat on the other side of Lagos. The family that had celebrated Gerald's cruelty now lived with its consequences. They barely spoke to each other. Too much blame. Too much shame. Gerald's fall was the hardest of all. He went from being a successful real estate agent to working behind a car rental counter at Murtala Muhammad Airport, helping travelers with their reservations. He wore a polyester uniform with a crooked name tag. He moved into a one-bedroom apartment in a rough part of Oshodi, the kind of neighborhood he used to drive through and feel superior about. One evening, about 6 months after the conference, Gerald was picking up a takeout order from a restaurant in Lekki Phase 1, a restaurant he could no longer afford to eat in. He saw Wendy through the glass window, sitting at a table with a man in an expensive suit. She was laughing, touching the man's hand, looking radiant and completely at ease. The man stood up to use the restroom. For one brief moment, Wendy looked toward the window. Her eyes met Gerald's. She stared at him for 3 long seconds. Her face was completely blank, like she was looking at a total stranger. Then she looked away, picked up her wine glass, and took a slow sip like he had never existed at all. Gerald picked up his takeout bag and walked to his car feeling smaller than he had ever felt in his entire life. He had lost everything: his career, his money, his family's respect, his pride. And the woman he had thrown his marriage away for would not even acknowledge that he was alive. He was completely alone. Exactly what he had told Sandra she would be. 1 year after the conference, Sandra stood in front of a beautiful new building in the neighborhood where Rose used to live in Enugu. The morning sun was warm and golden. A small crowd had gathered on the street outside. Local residents, community leaders, young women who had traveled from different parts of the city just to be there. Above the entrance, a brand new sign read, "Rose's House, a community center for women in transition." Sandra stood before the crowd in a simple but elegant dress, Rose's silver locket resting gently at her throat. She looked peaceful. She looked happy. She looked free. "Thank you all for being here," Sandra said, her voice warm and steady. "This center is named for my grandmother, Rose, who taught me that real power is not about revenge. It is not about proving people wrong. It is about building something that lasts. Something that helps people. Something that matters." She gestured to the building behind her. "Rose's house will provide resources for women leaving difficult situations. Women who need job training. Women who need a place to start over. Women who need to be reminded that they are stronger than they know." She paused, her fingers resting on the locket. "My grandmother built wealth from nothing. She taught me to do the same. Now I want to help other women build their own strength." The crowd applauded warmly. A little girl in the front row waved at Sandra with both hands. Sandra smiled and waved back, and for just one moment, her eyes glistened. Sandra's life had transformed completely over that 1 year. She ran her empire openly now. No more hiding behind shell companies. No more keeping her name out of public records. She sat on the boards of major corporations in Lagos and Abuja. She mentored young women in business, teaching them about real estate investment and building wealth from the ground up. She gave talks at universities. She appeared on magazine covers. The quiet woman the world had never seen was now impossible to ignore. She dated occasionally but carefully. She had learned her lesson about giving her heart away too quickly. She understood now that love without wisdom is just vulnerability wearing a pretty dress. One quiet afternoon, Sandra drove through the streets of Lagos and turned onto Wemco Road. She slowed her car as she approached the house, the same house Gerald had tried to sign away for 1 naira. She had converted it into affordable housing for single mothers. 6 warm apartments where women could raise their children in a safe and beautiful neighborhood. She had kept the kitchen exactly as it was. The same kitchen where she had cooked so many meals that nobody ever appreciated. Now other women cooked there, making memories with their children, building their own stories inside those walls. Sandra sat in her car for a moment, just looking at the building. She could see a light on in one of the upstairs windows. She could faintly hear a child laughing somewhere inside. She smiled. Sandra pulled out her phone and looked at an old photograph of Rose. It was taken years ago in front of the small house in Enugu where Sandra had grown up. Rose was standing with her hands on her hips, smiling like a woman who knew exactly who she was and exactly what she had built. Sandra stared at that photograph for a long time. "I hope I made you proud, Grandma," she whispered softly. She touched the locket at her throat, feeling its familiar weight against her skin. That small piece of silver had seen everything. The humble beginnings in Enugu. The betrayal in Lagos. The transformation. The triumph. It had been there through every single moment, carrying Rose's love like a quiet flame that never went out. Sandra did not think about Gerald much anymore. He was a chapter in her story. A painful one. But also one of the most valuable. He had taught her that she did not need anyone's validation to know her own worth. He had taught her that people show you exactly who they are if you pay close enough attention. He had taught her that the right kind of silence is not weakness, it is the most powerful weapon a person can carry. She started her car and drove away from Wemco Road, leaving those memories behind her where they belonged. She had a board meeting in an hour, a mentoring session after that, and a quiet dinner by herself later that evening at her favorite restaurant in Victoria Island. Her life was full. Her heart was healing. Her future was wide open and completely her own. As Sandra merged into the evening Lagos traffic, the city alive and buzzing all around her, she understood something Rose had tried to teach her all those years ago at a small kitchen table in Enugu. You do not need to make noise to be powerful. You do not need to explain yourself to people who have already decided who you are. You just need to know your own worth, build your life with quiet purpose, and trust that the truth will always find its moment to speak. Because sometimes the quietest person in the room owns everything in it. Sandra touched Rose's locket one final time as the Lagos skyline glowed gold in the distance ahead of her. She was not the woman Gerald had tried to erase. She was the woman Rose had always known she would become. And she was just getting started. We've come to the end of today's story. I hope it touched your heart. Thanks for watching and staying with us till the end. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories. See you in the next one. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from?